Today, we are back for another episode of the MLOps coffee sessions. This morning, we've got something special. Vishnu's definitely going to be having some coffee. He just woke up because our guest today is calling in all the way from Australia. We've got Grant, who is working at Seek, which I know nothing about. I hope that he's going to tell us a little bit about it. He totes to have 100 data scientists on his team, and he is leading these different data scientists. So we're going to be talking all about different processes that he has in place, different organizational problems or structures when it comes to ML and MLOps, and how to be that translator between the business case that you're trying to solve or the problems that you're trying to solve, and then bringing that to the data scientists and the machine learning scientists. So we've got a great show for you all. Hope you enjoy. Before we start, if you like this, give us a like or write a review on iTunes or Podcast Land. That would be very helpful for us. I normally don't ask for that, but now someone told me the algorithm really likes it if you do that. So give us a like if you are enjoying it. Let's get cracking. Grant, thank you for coming on here, and thank you for staying up late. I know it is a stretch. We are all over the globe today. I'm in Europe, you're in Oz, Vishnu's in New York. And so it's cool that we all found a time to come together. I think it would be a proper start if we can hear a little bit about your journey thus far and how you came to be where you're at.
Yeah, thanks, guys, and thanks for the invite. It's great to finally pull this together. So I studied computer science and economics back in New Zealand, and then didn't actually practice. So I'm not a data scientist. I went into management consulting for 10 years, helping companies with strategy, performance improvement, mergers and acquisitions. So it was analytical, but in an Excel financial model kind of way, not a machine learning kind of way. But I always had a bent towards analytics. And I joined Seek 5 years ago now. So Seek is a global employment marketplace. So we have leading online job sites in Australia, New Zealand, all throughout Asia and Latin America. So for listeners based in the US and Europe, you can think of companies like Indeed and Stepstone, some of the products like LinkedIn that we're very similar to, but we're the leaders in our markets here. So I held various strategy and operation roles at Seek, but because of my analytical bent, I ended up spending a lot of time working on data and matching strategies with the AI team, and started doing a piece of work on how we better leverage our data across these teams, throughout the world, and AI teams to compete with our much larger global competitors like Google, LinkedIn, Indeed. And so we ultimately ended up saying we need to bring this kind of fragmented AI efforts together and work on solving these problems once, and sort of have the localization in the data rather than in the code, get much more efficient and have really capable teams solving problems once. So I did a piece of work to kind of think through that organizational change and that setup, ended up running the strategy of that team initially, and then pretty quickly got to lead that team. And it, as you said, sort of grew from 30 data scientists, engineers, and product managers to over 100 today. So it's been a pretty wild ride, and I feel really lucky to be, now in this problem space and leading what I think is a pretty incredible team.
So the first thing that comes to my mind is the idea of data scientists and having that many data scientists and leading them. I just think it's got to be like herding cats. So how do you deal with this?
Yeah, a little bit. So our team, that scale of team, is made up of a good portion of data scientists, but also a lot of engineers and quite a few product managers as well. So it's definitely a challenge, but I've got a leadership team with really good ML and product and engineering leaders, which definitely helps. And then we organize into kind of cross-functional teams focused around different problem spaces. So I can talk much more around kind of the strategy and the problems we're trying to solve in each space. And then we've kind of got structures set up to help the teams deliver it and keep everyone aligned, which is helpful. But yeah, it's a challenge. We have, whenever you hire really good technical people, they're hard to manage because they expect the best.
Yeah, and the idea of data science is very much, we talk about this a lot in the community, how it's very much like a lone wolf kind of thing because it is so hard to collaborate these days. And being a data scientist, it's very difficult to really share. And if you're not in the same room with someone, even harder.
Yeah, I think that's true. And we kind of, when we're setting up the team, we sort of said, well, we want to define the right boundaries and interfaces in our teams and think about where the innovation happens. And to us, that's probably at the intersection of, you know, the product vision and strategy, the data and machine learning capability, and the engineering. Because often you got to pull all those things together to be solving a useful problem for the user. You got to be using kind of new techniques and breaking constraints that solve the problem in an interesting way. And you got to have the engineering capability to make it performant, so it shows up in the product in the right way. So that's why we went for the cross-functional team. It's a challenge to drive collaboration both within teams and across teams when you're doing that kind of work. Absolutely. But I think if you can get close to getting it right, I don't think you ever get it perfect. You can get some pretty special outcomes.
Sweet. So let's talk a minute about the journey that you've had when it comes to growing the team and how you went from a smaller team and then knew, hey, we need to get these engineers on board. We need to get, maybe it's data engineers, data scientists, machine learning engineers. How did the composition look like, and how did that go from the scaling perspective? Because I think we talked before about this, how that is something that a lot of people are wondering right now as they've proven out business value with a small team in their machine learning, with their machine learning team. Then how do you grow that team in a way that makes sure that you're not finding bottlenecks and having problems?
Yeah, I think maybe it's helpful. I mean, I've been at SIG 5 years. SIG's been doing AI in some form for about 8. So the journey kind of predates my time, but I think it kind of lays out a few key stages which maybe resonate with people. So I think about sort of 8 or so years ago, the first stage before me was really teaching the organization what AI is and how to do AI. So we hired an AI leader. He went about kind of building a team, teaching the organization what AI was, and working with data teams to actually get the data in a shape where you could actually do something, right? And so you end up with a small team of data scientists and at least some data to work with, and an organization that's starting to understand how you might use this beyond knowing that they think they need to do something with machine learning and AI, right? And then the second stage, I think, was this kind of individual data science contributors delivering kind of local value in product teams. So data scientists kind of going into a product team, working with a separate engineering team, a separate data team, kind of often taking orders from product managers who want AI to solve a problem. And so the team delivered a lot of great stuff there, but it couldn't really scale. And you often get things like, there's a very one-way relationship with product at that point. So product managers would say, they wouldn't just say, I need to solve this problem. Then in some cases, they'd even come and say, I need a random forest to solve this prediction problem because they've been reading about it, which you can imagine how that goes down with data scientists. Or just as bad on the other side, you've got a data scientist kind of sitting in the corner solving a problem they think is really useful and probably is, but they don't have product on board, so they can never get it to production. So to be fair to the team, they delivered a lot of value. We developed recommendations and a whole lot of services, but it was starting to hit kind of natural limits. And we'd been doing some experiments with a startup business of ours where we had engineers and data scientists working together on a new search platform using AI. And we just found that this sort of combination of a product/strategy person, engineers and data scientists working together in a small team on a problem could just deliver stuff really quickly, and it would show up and you could test it quickly and learn. So it was just really, really effective and efficient. And we started sort of playing with that model, which pretty much led us into stage 3, which was this we think we actually want to pull this together and create end-to-end services where teams can be much more accountable for what they produce. They can own a problem space. They can deliver services up to an API layer, and they can sort of measure performance and be accountable for it. Whereas previously, if you had model drift or something, you'd then have to go back and beg to get on someone's roadmap to get engineers to solve the problem. So that's where my journey started, where we pretty much reorganized and brought together AI engineering, product management into these cross-functional teams.
Wow, that's fascinating to hear about how the beginning of it was just the educational piece. And so I imagine there was a lot of POCs happening there, or was it just trying to let people know, hey, this is possible, that's possible, this is where we can go with this. If we have this data, we can do this.
You do it right back at the very start? Or? Yeah, exactly. It was sort of like, well, this is what we need. You know what it's like when you go into an organization that thinks they have the data ready for AI, but when you get in there, they really don't. So there's a lot of that. And then just a lot of, how do we think about the problem space and what value AI can deliver?
Got it.
Yeah.
So one of the questions that I kind of have around what Seek is doing with AI and how you've organized your team, as you mentioned, you have these really cross-functional groups across product, strategy, data science that are kind of coming together to really supercharge the projects that you want AI to impact. Could you talk a little bit about some of the core use cases that really helped you understand that that's the way to organize your teams? Was it projects in search or NLP or recommender systems? What kind of projects was it that you found really required that kind of expertise to come together? And what kind of use cases do you use ML for?
Yeah, so I think we see value in that approach across all our use cases. So obviously we're trying to match candidates and hirers with jobs. So a lot of our work is in search and recommenders to match candidates and jobs together. We also do work around pricing and performance on the platform and trying to understand who a good candidate is. So, and within that is a lot of NLP, because the job space and people's skills and experience are very complex and often in unstructured text. So it sort of spans a really interesting problem space. As I said, search is probably the first use case where we started exploring bringing these small teams together of engineering, data science, product management in a small team, kind of trying to get an MVP up. And we found that kind of really productive. And when we expanded that, we probably spent the first 6 months of the teams just going out trying to understand who their customers were, understand what their needs were far better. Because sometimes you produce a model file and then it gets shopped around the organization and you don't actually know who's using your service. So the first point of getting accountable was to find out, hey, who's using this thing and what for, and is it fit for purpose? Let's get some contracts written down about what we're trying to do here. And then, having that engineering capacity on board and that relationship with product, I feel like we just released like 2 years of latent innovation from the data scientists who had all these great ideas but couldn't find a way to get it into production because they had to align roadmaps and get resourcing. So we had this really efficient period of just delivering stuff through alignment and engineering capacity. And then we kind of went back into platform building mode to scale again and go global.
Yeah, that's a really powerful transition to be able to go from, understanding what the fit looks like and then wanting to scale that. It's almost like your team got product market fit within the company.
Yeah, it was certainly it always sounds beautiful and easy when you play it back, right? It was like a massive organizational change. We pretty much flipped everyone's role on their head, and you had these previously really autonomous data scientists now having to work in a cross-functional team and align with product managers. So I definitely wouldn't say it was an easy change, but the results are really showing up now, which is awesome.
So can we zoom into that transition period for a little bit? Because you were talking about there was some turmoil or it wasn't easy, but what was it that wasn't easy and how did you eventually see the light at the end of the tunnel?
Yeah, it definitely wasn't easy. I think the first thing is change is always hard, right? And we kind of changed the way everyone works. So we took data scientists who had kind of a lot of autonomy over what they did, and we put them together with product managers trying to come with, a bit more strategy and product vision around the problem space that data scientists also like to get involved in and add a lot of value in doing so. And engineers to try and think about how to structure the hybrid people, a bit of engineering and a bit of ML, and we tried to structure that a bit more and get more engineering expertise in there to support and improve performance and maintainability. So everyone felt a little bit awkward and treading on people's toes. The operating model was completely different. We're asking for a lot more collaboration. We're asking for people to write stuff down in terms of what they're delivering. And that's just kind of hard and painful, right? And people have to change the way they work. I think some of the things that help deal with that, firstly, we were pretty clear. We did a lot of thinking up front as to why this model might make sense and some of the rituals that we had that we thought were really important. So we knew the things to hold the line on when people started getting frustrated. And I think what you find is like every organizational model has trade-offs, right? And people tend to see the downside of the trade-off. So if you're small and you're moving fast and you're breaking things, people say this is chaotic. We're doing a lot of duplication. And as you're trying to build out, maintainability and performance, people say, oh, we're moving too slowly. And they can't always see the trade-off. So I think having leadership who could hold the line on that was helpful. But we did say, look, we're not going to get everything right. We're going to try and be better, not perfect. And we're going to listen and change where we do get it wrong. And I think we maybe took too long to adapt sometimes, but I think we got there. And ultimately, teams get motivated by the outcomes they deliver. So pushing through quickly and getting to the other side and seeing a whole lot of value delivered, that's really what drives teams' motivation. And so I think that was really helpful too.
There's something that you told me that is, when it comes to MLOps and AI teams, there's no clear blueprint. And when you're trying to operationalize these models, your teams need to evolve, and you need to set clear direction and expectation. And I'd love to hear more about what you were speaking of when we were talking about that.
Yeah, I think it's, there's a lot of great stuff on this podcast. There's a lot of documentation out there. I've been to a bunch of conferences, hearing people talk about how to organize teams. Everyone's got a slightly different view. There's debates around full stack versus ML engineers and data scientists. So we did a lot of that reading and research and thinking and sort of came to the view that there's no right answer here. We need to think about our situation. We kind of need to go back to first principles and say, what do we want to design? We took a pretty lean approach. So we said, well, there's all these roles we could have. Let's think about what we absolutely need. And then we talk about letting constraints surface. So, rather than thinking about roles that commonly people talk about, we thought about the capabilities we need. And then when we had a gap or an issue, then we'd add it back. Because otherwise we would have started with a delivery manager, a BA, an IM, an engineering manager, a data scientist, a research scientist. And we just didn't have the scale for that starting out. So we tried to start lean and kind of figure it out as we went, but come up with some pretty clear principles that we could hold to as we grew.
Yeah, two things stand out to me in your last two answers. Number one, it seems like you guys are very thoughtful about how you work, not just what you work on, which I think is incredibly crucial in any organization. I think that's one thing that we've realized through, even running the MLOps community or working at, my startup, like how you work, how you structure delivery, how you work, with rigor and everything. That is a crucial part of working effectively, not just what you choose to work on. And then the second piece really is around this idea of capabilities, and not necessarily, building out teams just based on titles, but based on what you can do. I think that's an important mental shift that leaders need to make. And even just members of the team need to make in terms of how they think about team composition and what sort of targets you want to be able to hit. So I think kind of jumping off those 2 points, one of the questions that I wanted to ask you about is what a war story has been that your team has gone through, kind of jumping off. Our community loves hearing specific stories of projects that may have gone really well, or may have not gone so well.
Failed.
And so yeah, that war story concept, people are always trading those, and would love to hear maybe one of the ones that sticks out for you that you're maybe really proud of, that you would share with us about how AI at Seek has developed.
When you said war story, I was thinking about all the lessons we've learned, and not so much the things I'm proud of. But maybe we try and do both.
Yeah,
Well, you're
exactly.
proud of what you
doesn't
learned.
have to.
I mean, I'm proud of a lot. I'm really proud of what the team's done, and mostly proud about kind of the model we've built and how it's now starting to show up in delivery. So we set out sort of 4 years ago or so to build an AI-driven search engine pretty much from scratch, which was a pretty big decision for us. And to now have that running in multiple markets around the world, delivering massive uplift. And we can deploy features now when they roll out in multiple markets around the world. We can have localization in the data, so the code is pretty much the same, but the models are different per market. So I'm really proud that we had that vision to kind of build that scale, and it's definitely paid off, but it certainly wasn't easy to get there. I think some of the war stories in terms of lessons we've learned, where we had teams who maybe had internal customers and didn't have a product team and a user outcome, there's a real temptation to kind of build towards perfect and get away from that MVP, or we call it a thin slice, because I think we want to build out the feedback loops and some of the things that are important for ML, not just kind of get the product out, but actually get some of those other things behind it that make you be able to improve the product. But we didn't have that thin slice and some of those things. So you tend to run too long and you don't kill projects early enough or get out into market and start learning early enough. So I think we've definitely learned to add more constraints where the user isn't, or the product team's not giving us that constraint. That's definitely been one.
Got it. Yeah, I think, it's always great to hear when companies can figure out, what works for them, which it sounds like Seek has certainly done, from the standpoint of bringing very cross-functional teams together, trying to organize a little bit more capability-wise. I think some of the war stories that we've heard have been really all over the map. I think, where it's even just, model files not being saved correctly because good engineering practices are not sort of baked into data science workflows, or other errors like that. And so kind of going from that point of lessons learned, one of the things that you told us about that you're really excited when it comes to your team organization is this idea of sort of interfaces and accountability between the teams, so that teams can own a lot, but then that handoff process, that delivery process really works smoothly. And this is something that I think, I'm sure Demetrios knows our community is really passionate about. We have a whole channel called Production Code where people are just talking about what is the quality of the code that everyone should write. Is it data scientists doing a lot more than maybe they're comfortable with today? Are they getting into all the complexities around software engineering, or is it just handoff model file? So I'm curious, how do you sort of define the sort of technical and maybe managerial interfaces between teams in the sort of AI organization at Seek?
Yeah, sure. So our primary partners, so we solve the kind of ML information problem for the business. And then we have product partners on the other side that take that kind of AI solution or service and put it in a product. So they'll pick up, we'll do a search, recall, and ranking, and then they'll design the experience around it. And so we typically have APIs that multiple products or teams can call that solve that problem. So from a technical interface externally, where we can, it tends to be API driven. And so that gives us a nice technical boundary where we can define requirements. The other really important factor is just sort of the contract we have with our product partners. And we call them partners, not customers, deliberately, because it's a two-way relationship. And it's not like detailed contracts, but you've got to write down what this thing's going to do, what it's not going to do, and what good looks like. And we need to know when people are calling our service and why. they need to know what they should expect from it, how we're going to maintain it, and that we're monitoring it. So I think both of those things have really helped us. As you say, just understand who our customers are, so we don't have model files being slacked around the organization that no one knows are being used and can't be maintained. And then we're trying to create that incentive, like people feel like they own something that shows up in a product and they're proud of it and they can continue to improve it.
And that's something pretty fascinating that I've heard a few people mention, is very clearly defining what you're going to do or what you're responsible for and what you're not responsible for, and how much of an impact that makes, because then you don't have any gray areas where someone from another team, like you were talking about, or your partners think that that is your thing and you're thinking it's their thing, and then it leads to confusion. And so there's something that is fascinating to me over this whole journey that you were talking about, from when you were first starting and there would be a model in production, and then if something needed to happen, like it needed to be retrained or a drift was happening, you had to go and basically petition for DevOps people's time or other engineers' time so that they could fix that. But now it seems like it's a whole different scenario. And along that process, is there some, like, I think it goes along with the last question, like these guardrails that you've put up so that you're not having to ask for someone else's time? Is it just that you set up the teams so that within the team you have that? Or is there still like the asking that's happening is just not as bad?
I guess you're asking about self-sufficiency, basically. You're kind of talking about stuff.
Yeah. It's a little bit of both, but within the team, what we say is, like, we want teams to be accountable for a service and solving a problem end to end, right? And if we're going to make them accountable for that, they need all the capability to solve that problem end to end. And that's typically for us up to an API that's providing some sort of model output or a prediction, right? So that means they need the product manager to define the problem and deal with those boundary contracts with the product team and say what it will and won't do. They need data science to solve the model, and they need engineering to deploy it in production and maintain it and make it performant. So that's why we say all our teams essentially have representation from product, data science, and engineering. But we also then try and encourage kind of collaboration across teams, right? So if you're going to build a service that needs another capability and a team's built something that can do that to 80% of what you need, say you want to normalize a role title or do some sort of prediction to get a feature, we'd much rather you went to the other team and got them to build out their service to meet your needs than replicate your own, right? Because that gives us scale and we can continually improve that, and you don't kind of get this cottage AI thing going on. So that does create some dependencies, but teams still have all the capability they need to have to deploy and maintain a service.
How do you make sure that these teams are in the loop and they know what the other teams are working on so that they aren't reproducing the same thing twice?
Yeah, it's hard, and we don't do it perfectly for sure, but we do kind of set up processes and rituals to talk about this stuff. We have pretty well documented product visions and service guides on various tools. We have OKRs that are shared across the team. And then we have a weekly team kind of showcase where teams will present what they're building, and then one team will present kind of something that they're working on. And that's one that we actually got quite a bit of rub up front, right? It's an hour a week. We initially did it on a Friday afternoon, which was one of those better not perfect things we dialed back pretty quickly. But we have held firm to kind of getting together as a team and sharing learnings. And I think all that little stuff helps, right? And it's never perfect. Like, we're doing so much and we don't want to block teams and slow them down, but we want to catch the important stuff.
Yeah, I imagine those Friday afternoons were a little bit tough.
We did it with beer and snacks, but it still didn't quite get cut through. So.
Yeah, we actually are very similar. sort of thing, and we had to shift it to Thursdays to really get the kind of push we needed. But that's really awesome to hear that your team has these shared rituals that people are buying into and using as ways to really communicate on the topics that matter and prevent the kind of duplication and sort of other consequences we talked about. I think we've learned an incredible amount about your team, how far it's come, and what some of the things that have really worked for you to date are. I'm curious now, and I'm sure our listeners would like to know, where do you see your team going, right? What kind of improvements would you like to continue to see in the organization or in the delivery of the models or the model products themselves? What are your priorities there through the rest of the year and maybe into next year?
Yeah, I mean, we touched on the collaboration point. I still don't think we've cracked that nut. So I think, we're now at a scale where we can invest much more in platform infrastructure and doing things slightly more common data assets. Our teams have had sort of common principles and standards, but a lot of autonomy. And that's been really successful to the point where now we've got opportunities to do things more common, focus on the new problems. So I think, we're really thinking through where does it make sense to do things more common versus keep things, flexible and innovative. So I think we're really trying to look at that hard and get the balance right there, but it's certainly more common than where we are today, I think. We're always thinking about how we work, as you said, and we had a guide of teams of 6 to 10. As we've scaled, some of those teams have got quite big, so we're starting to think about how do we adjust that? Do we need to break into sub teams, and what does that look like? And then I think as the rest of Seek grows and moves on to more common platforms across our geographies, we're a very centralized model. I see some of that probably going back in and going back into the organization and getting much closer to product again as the business evolves. So they're all things we're starting to think about now.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. One of the things that stuck out to me is this idea that you mentioned around wanting to invest more into the platform and wanting to invest more into kind of taking those things that you're all doing and turning them into infrastructural components. I think we have had some people on that talked a little bit about elements of their platform from a technical standpoint, model serving, model monitoring, these things that they try and common development environments. What kind of things are you trying to really pack into in a platform level in your sort of data science and machine learning workflow?
Yeah, I think all the common ones that this podcast has talked about before. So we've had false starts and then tries again with kind of common model deployment frameworks and processes that are far more automated. I think the lesson we learned there was you've got to you can't just build it and assume they'll come. You've got to get teams on board and build it, but then you've got to force teams across, because getting stuck in the middle with a common solution that half the people use is the worst of both worlds, and we got caught by that a bit. But we're going back to that one. We're looking at we're experimenting with feature stores again. Through our search and matching platforms, we've built some really performant lookup, hardcore engineering systems that have much more applicability, we think. So we're just trying to find the right balance for that.
Is it a platform team that you task to create this unifying system for all of the different teams to use? Or are you going about it like teams are adopting one piece and then it gets spread throughout the company, or something totally different?
Yeah, we don't have, so we've got some support teams around specific things, some data infrastructure and DevOps and security, but we don't have a dedicated platform team. It tends to come out of individual teams experimenting for themselves and then getting other teams on board. I think when we reach that tipping point and we want to drive people across, I think that's when you do want to think about giving it a dedicated team that can maintain it and really invest in it. We're not quite there yet, but that's something we're definitely thinking about.
What I love is that you're focusing a lot on the organizational piece as opposed to adding the new shiny tool right away. And you want to make sure that the organization is right and how the processes that are around that are correct. And then Now, as you're looking ahead and you feel like you've got that pretty stable, you're starting to look ahead and say, hey, let's check out some tools. Instead of vice versa, where you have a problem and you think the tool is going to fix that problem, when really that doesn't actually add much more value to what is going on, and you're still faced with the same kind of problems. It's just you're paying a lot for a new tool.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, we obviously care about all of it, right? But we focus first on getting the best talent in to solve the problems in the smartest way, giving a lot of context around which problems are most important, because there's infinite problems we could work on, and then getting that organizational system. Because what we find is, and I think this is true across most teams, like there's no shortage of smart data science coming out that can add value. The challenge is getting it down the pipe and getting it into production. So focus on that system first and adding value. And then that gives you the, it gives you the scale, but it also gives you the support of the organization to invest in some of this supporting infrastructure when you're ready. And we are smaller than a bunch of our competitors, even though we're quite a big team. So we have to be mindful of, not over investing in bespoke. And a lot of these tools are commoditizing a bit. So there's things that we did early bespoke that we need to think about retiring and getting off the shelf so we can move on to so we can stay on the leading edge. And I think that's a real watch out. And a big part of my role is to say, when do we stop? Because it's always hard to stop investing, because that's a solved problem now. Let's move on. But yeah, I think we've done it in that order. We've always talked about platforms in common where it makes sense. And now it's really starting to make sense for us.
Yeah, that's a great summary of how you think about it. I think it's actually incredibly easy, speaking as somebody at a much smaller team, to really focus on those tactical components before you answer the big strategic questions, because a lot of times you don't really know how to articulate strategic questions in a way that makes sense to you, your teammates, and how to bring that to management effectively. I think, when the strategy is not clear, everybody sees it. Not everybody knows how to diagnose it and how to treat, how to then come up with a plan to fix it. So it makes sense to hear how you've been able to solve that problem and that cultural gap, given your background in particular. And I think jumping off that, one of my questions to you is, let's say a new ML manager at a mid-stage tech startup, comes to you and asks you for advice. What's the one piece of advice that you would give to that person, and kind of saying, this is what I think you should maybe think about as you're in this new role?
Great question. It's hard to boil it down to one, but I think it is focused on, because I talk their ear off, but it comes back to that core of understand the organization's strategy, the user problem you're trying to solve, and how, why are you bringing data and ML to this problem? Because it's an enormous cost and a huge investment to do this stuff right. So you've got to have a view of the world that you can break these constraints and do something really valuable with it, and you've got to be ready to prioritize. So I think that would be my one, but I'd have 50 others as well, and half of them are probably wrong. But
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think it's always a fun question to ask, because it's never just one point. These things are really complicated, and but it's fun to hear what the top thing at people's what issues are top of mind for people. And for you, it sounds like this question around why you're trying to do what it is you're doing, understanding that intimately, deeply. It seems like that really trickles through your entire organization. I mean, from the standpoint of calling people product partners, having these shared OKRs, really trying to emphasize, why are we doing what we're doing? Why do we have that sort of empathy? How do you maintain that? What are some of the things that you have? I think you mentioned rituals. What are some of the most successful rituals or practices that you have that allow day-to-day professionals to stay close to the customer and have that sort of strategic understanding?
Yeah, I think we're lucky. It seeks a very, lucky or unlucky, possibly, depending on who you ask. But I came from strategy. So Seek is a very strategy-driven organization. We're a business that, we're a marketplace business. Strategy is really important to us. So we have a very clear and written down view of what matters to our business and our users, and and where we want to go. So I think that's a really helpful. And then we spend quite a bit of time distilling it down, saying, well, what's my team's product vision? What are we trying to solve? What are the trends playing out in the market that we need to play into, so that teams have that context, and then they can work with product partners looking up at these goals and jointly say, well, here's our roadmap and here are our OKRs, and we've actually aligned the dependencies so that when I produce this model, someone's ready on the other side to actually pick it up and put it in an experience. So I think those kind of rituals and planning are really, really valuable.
Are the different stakeholders involved, and especially the higher ups in the business who are trying to solve these business problems with ML, are they very familiar with ML, or are you having to educate them? It seems like since it's been going on for so long, I would imagine they understand not only the value, but the problems that it can solve. Or is it a constant education session with what's going on?
I'd say they're pretty good, right? We're pretty lucky. We've got a great exec team, and we've had AI for a while, and it's just so core to what we do that everyone understands the potential and what we've done and what we can do. And that's not by accident, it's because it matters to us and because we've put a lot of effort into telling the story and explaining why. So I do think we are lucky there, but you've got to keep, like, people either massively underestimate or massively overestimate what AI can do and the data that you have, right? So we do spend a lot of time challenging ourselves on that and then sharing it around the business to say, this is our roadmap, this is what we can do, this is why we can't do that. I think that never goes away, but we're in a pretty fortunate starting position, I feel.
And talking about massively overestimating or underestimating, I know that this is a big one that happens, and we talk about it quite a bit, is how to properly estimate different machine learning projects and the time it's going to take, the resources you're going to need. How do you go about that?
Yeah, that one's hard. I think we tend to work on, we're lucky, there's a million problems we could solve. We tend to work on the really big ones, and we do put a lot of work into how we'll solve them. But it tends to be problems that when you get it right, and we've got a pretty good view that we will be able to get it right at some point, it's not a 10% return, it's like a 300% return if we nail it. So we tend to have longer term strategies. We try and break that up and deliver value along the way, obviously, but so it's much more big chunks of value around big problems rather than little projects where we have to time box it to 2 or 3 months.
And so then when I just was thinking about what you were saying earlier on this, and trying to get something going quickly, and then you have these big problems that you're going after. But now I can't remember the question that I wanted to ask about it. Whatever.
Well, I think that makes a lot of sense.
I kind of contradict myself there, but I think, you have a big problem and a big view, but you want to get going early, right, and start learning in market and proving that this thing is actually real. One of the things in strategy is I feel like one of the most important things to learn is the stuff you think is true that's actually not, right? And so stuff we know that's not true, that's really dangerous. And so we might have a really strong hypothesis, we're investing hard behind some data field or a personalization trend that actually doesn't add the value we thought it would to a user. And knowing that early is super valuable, particularly if you're investing in big projects and long-term value.
Yeah, I think Demetrius's point and your point, what you just said, it really comes back to this question that I'm curious to get your thoughts on, which is the trade-off between speed and quality. That is something that I find I have had to articulate more in my role that I've been talking to people about in the community. As engineers, data scientists, in any profession, there's always this fundamental trade-off. I mean, and to the extent possible, you don't want to make that trade-off, right? You want to move fast with high quality baked in. I mean, that's the whole promise of the continuous delivery framework and a lot of the DevOps and MLOps sort of revolution. In your experience, how have you had to deal with that at Seek, and how have, what perspective do you think, you and your teammates have on that trade-off?
Yeah, I mean, clearly what you deploy has to add value, right? So we have one of the first kind of, you could call it a platform team or support team we invested in, was really good experimentation capability and testing. So
That's
clearly
awesome.
what you produce, and that just was a game changer for us, right? Like I think a lot of businesses out there who run A/B tests are probably only as accurate as flipping a coin when you get down to the proper stats. So that was hugely valuable. And so clearly, from a quality standpoint, you've got to be not destroying value in the market, and you've got to have a system set up that can have a path to improvement. And that's where we talk about the thin slice of not just get something out there that works, but get something out there that has a feedback loop that is supported and production ready and can be improved. That's kind of, if you can get to that baseline quickly and test something in market really quickly, that's sort of the bare minimum you want to get to, and you want to get that out as fast as possible, but have a path to improvement.
That was it. When you said thin slice, I remembered what I was gonna say about, and it was, yeah, exactly. It was talking about how you saw that sometimes you spend too much time on different projects and you don't get that thin slice out quick enough. And then when we were also talking about how you're really tackling these big problems, so I could see how that would happen, like how that manifestation can happen, because if you are trying to tackle these gigantic problems and they take months or potentially years to really get right, then you're in the development process for so long that you can't see the forest from the trees, kind of thing, or is it you can't see the trees from the forest? And so I can imagine that's what happens, and then you don't get something out. So is there just sometimes where you say, let's just get it out no matter what?
Yeah, I think so, right? And we're lucky. Seek's a relatively big business. We've got our core platforms are very valuable and have a lot of user expectations, but we've got investments in startups and other platforms that are willing to take a bit more risk. So we can use those to push stuff out a little bit early, and that can be really valuable, right? Because you can take a lot more risk, learn quickly without kind of risking your core business. So we're very lucky to have those partners and have their support. But I think, you definitely want to avoid, even if you can't get it out, you need to set really tight boundaries for success and probably time box it, right? Because otherwise you'll go for 2-3 years in the pursuit of perfection, testing against gold sets, and just not have the scale to know whether you're actually adding value or not.
Makes complete sense. And I know we've kept you over time. This has been awesome. It's late night where you're at, so go ahead. You've done an amazing job. You've blown my mind on so many levels. I think you've earned the right to go to bed now. This has been so awesome, man. It's been just hearing about the whole story, the immense amount of effort that you've gone through when it goes from just starting out with the AI program at Seek and then growing it to such a large program and such a large team, and then the insights around how you're running these teams and what you're doing to enable them to be successful has been very, very powerful. So I think that's about all I've got. Vishnu, you have any last words?
Yeah, I think I agree with everything you're saying. Thank you so much for coming on, Grant, and for sticking with us through this hour. It's been really helpful, again, as Demetrios said, to hear about all these managerial and sort of leadership components of how to get AI right, I guess, in loose terms. And I think, for us, a lot of the people in the community are very technical. We are, kind of on the either individual contributor or tech lead kind of track. And so it's always helpful to have someone that's in a little bit sort of a different vantage point kind of come in and say, this is the way I think about, the challenges that we're trying to solve. I think all of us are trying to solve it. It's just from different vantage points. So thank you so much for joining us and sharing your wisdom.
Yeah, thanks, guys. It's been an absolute pleasure. And as I say, we're certainly not perfect, but we're always trying to get better. So happy to share at least our learnings. Thanks a lot.
And if anybody is in Australia, are you guys hiring? I want to give you some kind of plug.
Always. Yeah,
I figure
data scientists, engineers, product managers. We've got an awesome team and a lot of problems to solve. So absolutely.
Do you sponsor visas? Because maybe I'll apply for a job. I wouldn't mind living in Australia for a little bit.
Yeah, we do. If you can get a flight here, that's the challenge at the moment, right? But,
That's true.
They're not letting anybody in.
That's the problem. But but if you can get here, we're pretty isolated. So in a global pandemic, it's not a bad place to be.
Yeah, I'll swim. It's all good, man. All right. Thanks again, Grant. We'll see you later.
Thanks,
man.
guys. Cheers.
It's been awesome.